Oh, because Delphine's disappeared, isn't she?
What's that noise?
There we go.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's event, which is going to be talking about tech talent trends and employer brand for 2023. So essentially, that's based on what the tech community has been telling us in 2022 via Universum research and some CW jobs insights, which we've been doing across the year. Very thankful to have the help of Tech UK as well. So if anybody's visiting via Tech UK, welcome. Full disclosure to begin with, we are CW Jobs, Universum, Totaljobs Group, all part of the Stepstone Group. But hopefully we're going to be talking conceptually here, but obviously adding in where potentially our products can help as well. But I'm going to be ably assisted by Steve Ward, who, as you can see there, is Head of Employer Branding Solutions at Universum. The very knowledgeable Tony JJ, who's Director of Product Solutions at Totaljobs Group, and myself, who is the Director at CW Jobs. So without further ado, if I tick things on and we run through the agenda. So who are Universum? What is an employer branding solutions head of, and how is their research going to help us? Then looking at tech talent satisfaction and how they feel about the market, how they feel about the ways to get into the market, and so forth. Then the gender pay gap in tech. Then some content choices, how to write those adverts, etc. Attracting and crucially retaining talent. No point in attracting all that talent if there's a huge hole at the bottom of the bucket. And hopefully some actionable advice for everybody. And then at the end, hopefully plenty of time for questions and answers. And we'll make time for that. But please, as the audience, feel free to drop in questions, and we will hopefully see those as we're going through. It's not a set piece that we will only answer those questions at the end. If we do get them in time, we'll try and add them into the flow of the chat as well. So, Steve, I think that you take things off initially.
I will. Yeah, thank you, Dom. Thanks for the introduction, and hi everybody. Thanks for having me and us talk a bit about tech talent with you, and some really interesting trends and thoughts from the team this morning. You're going to find super interesting, I'd like to think. Firstly, who are Universum? For those of you who aren't so familiar with Universum, there's a bit of a synopsis there on the screen, but ultimately we're an employer branding agency. We're the world's leading data-driven employer branding agency. What does that mean? That means right at the very front there, you see on the left-hand side in orange, is talent insights. And because as well as an employer branding agency, we're a research organization as well, interviewing, surveying over 1.5 million people around the globe around their career choices, ambitions, etc. for the year ahead. And in the UK, that amounts to just over 60,000 students and professionals. During the course of 2022, we're going to reflect on mainly with those professional respondents when we go through. But all of those insights shape the work that we do in those other areas around EVP, strategic development of employer brand, and all that work that goes into communications and marketing. Talent insights is at the heart, because if we know what people want, then we know what to say to people. We know how to communicate best. And there's a bunch of our lovely customers on the bottom. So a little bit of, so what are we going to look at? So I want to pinpoint a little bit into our research this year on certain areas that tell us a little bit about the trends of the way people feel. And that's really where a lot of Universum's research comes into. What do people feel about their work environment? What do they feel about where they might go? What do they feel about employers, etc., etc.? And the first thing we see here on the left-hand side is actually slight increases in 2022 in terms of average satisfaction with their current employer, slight rise from 7 out of 10 to 7.1 out of 10. So it's pretty decent. And equally to the right of that, 7.1 from 6.9 last year out of 10 would recommend their current employer. So slight element suggests a greater levels of stability. At the bottom left, we also see, in the response to the question we ask around their potential or interest in joining somebody else or changing their employer in certain periods, you can see there that the number of people that are looking to move within the coming year has dropped. In fact, the steepest part of that actually is a 0.6. That shows a 6% drop from 48% to 42%, which is still a decent chunk. We still have to consider, therefore, that maybe 4 in 10 of our people are probably thinking about moving in the next year, whereas last year maybe it was 5 in 10. But actually, in the next 6 months, it's gone from 50% or 51% down to around 40%. So the short-term need at the moment is not to move. Now, it then suggests rising satisfaction, which suggests a lower intent to move. So does that suggest all is good? That everybody's quite happy, retention should be good in the industry, etc. It's we're clearly seeing one of the reasons why attracting talent is hard at the minute and why application levels are quite tough at the moment, because of course people aren't moving. But does it mean everybody's happy in their world? Well, it's important when we look at insights to look at beyond the first layer of insights. You have to look at the next layer and the next layer to try and find where the insight, where the real knowledge is. And what was interesting when we looked at another set of questions, the following set of questions, which is around people's trust in their organization, the veneer, the simple factor of like, I do want to move or I don't want to move, goes a little bit deeper, because when we pose questions around statements that we ask for them to agree or disagree with around I trust my organization's vision, etc., we see big drops. 9% drop in my trust in my organization's vision, an 11% drop in the trust of the leaders in my organization, a 9% drop in I feel that the organization trusts me to do my job, and at the end there, massive 14% drop in I feel I have the appropriate skills to do my job to the best ability. So what this demonstrates, whilst on the first page we see this environment of stability, it would appear, kind of almost a degree of comfort in employment, behind the eyes, behind the veneer, actually there's no people aren't wedded to their employer. There isn't an uncertainty of staying. There isn't. And what this implies, therefore, is there is an opportunity in marketing. There is an opportunity in talent engagement. If we can get the right stories and tell the right stories in the right way and talk about trust, then there is an opportunity, because there is a degree of uncertainty, which I think is very, very fascinating.
Would you say that's unique to the tech market, Steve?
No, this is not. We found this across the industry. So I would say it's absolutely the case across all industries that the level of trust of employer has dropped.
Right.
For sure.
Yes, Tony, cut in there.
Yeah, no, I was just really interested in it. So what actually drives this, and how can it be resolved? Because it's all very well saying that there's a lack of trust, but what's the core?
Yeah. I think so. We watching the trends of this over the last 2 years, which has been the most fascinating journey of watching trust. Since COVID, levels of trust have gone through the floor, because whilst there was a year of hypercare when COVID came along and employers went into hypercare, and what that meant inadvertently is we created an environment of unfeasible levels of support by employers. What I mean by unfeasible, the year before it was nothing like it. Then we went into hypercare for very, very good reasons. But what it then did is it created false expectations of what it's like to be an employee. What it did, so our mindset changed. We started to get in the comfy chair and start to think about a world of hypercare employment. But businesses have to move on. Businesses still have to make money, still have to grow, still have to get back to a degree of normality. And so what we saw in the 2021 research, the previous year's research, is a drop in the beginning of the drop in this trust as we went out of lockdowns and back into we looked at this. I don't know if you remember, Don, we did this a year ago. We looked at it from a quarter by quarter perspective, and we saw all of a sudden the drop happened when we all went back to work in April last year. And that was not because it wasn't a bad idea that people needed to go back to work, but it's probably the way in which things were done. It was almost, there was a lack of thought of anxiety, etc. So there was lots of things that we saw. And what it also implied at the same time is a societal challenge that we're facing as well, that people have less respect for leadership and power than maybe they did in years gone by. And all of these things together have created this environment where people are just, according to our research, just not that happy anymore with employees, just don't believe in their people anymore. And that means we've got to start thinking about how do we build the bridge back to that trust? How do we create an environment? Because if people are telling us here, I don't trust my employer, I don't think they trust me either, by the way, then we need to make sure that, and it means that every time a candidate is looking for their next employer, what we do when we look for an ex-employer, we look to solve the challenges and the problems we have in the current employer. We don't want to make the same mistake twice, and so therefore that means that our communications of talent needs to be driven around the gap that is missing. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think that 2023, my guess is that one of the key areas of this friction is going to be this whole working from home, working in the office, and that interplay between employees and the employer.
Yes.
So I think it's going to be intriguing to see how that plays out, because you've seen very, very different
Yeah.
different directions, and probably worst of all, that grey area in the middle where people are not quite well.
No. Yeah,
They
exactly. One thing I will add to that before I move on to the next bit is actually in the new research in 2022, what we've now identified, which was different to the previous year, is people are more comfortable with remote working. Now, what we found last year is there's still areas of discomfort, areas where people had fears about working remotely, etc. Even though it might be a nice, like lovely that everyone's like flexible working, a nice work-life balance, etc. There are still some fears, so some inherent fears of being here in our room. But this year, a lot of those comforts have been allayed, and most people are back into a comfortable environment with remote. However, the two elements that we saw that had increased as concerns compared to 2021 were around bias, were around if I spend more time at home, people will think I'm not as good an employee. I will miss out on promotion opportunities. I'll get lower salary, etc., etc. I'll miss out, and that's is a really fascinating dynamic. So that point you've just mentioned there, Dom, about the remote, it's less about the remote or not remote. It's more about the psychology, the employer-employee relationship psychology around remote or not remote. It's like, what do we treat our people who tend to be at home all the time the same as we treat the people who tend to sit next to us in the office? And are we almost subconsciously showing an element of bias towards the people who we see around us all the time? So that is one of the psychological kind of culture challenges for organizations to try and address in their thinking around communication and that talk of retention, as you mentioned earlier, Dom.
And isn't
Yeah,
there just
you're
a
right.
related
From the
point
dips,
Yeah.
around anxiety? Because if you look at a lot of the tech companies,
Yeah.
right, some of the largest ones, Apple, even Twitter, they're now switching and saying, look, I want you back in the office. And I think that, again, is creating
Yeah,
a level of anxiety of where is this going to land? You know, I now have my life. This is how I'd like to live it. And it's almost, there's a dichotomy that has been created.
And when we think about trust, we've just been talking about trust. One way to lose trust is to create anxiety in your employees and discomfort in your employees, that they don't feel as equal and as fair, as treated as fairly as anybody else. Absolutely. And so that is another notch of where the trust relationship is absolutely dissipated. So yeah, spot on. So what we just learned there is that what we know that the candidate application levels are lower, people are hanging around. We also know people are hiring more at the moment. Hung Lee did a poll on LinkedIn just a couple of weeks ago, and where he put the poll out on LinkedIn that said, what is your hiring activity? Are you 1, hiring for growth, 2, are you hiring for replacement, or 3, hiring freeze? And just short of 60% said we're hiring for growth. And most of Hung Lee's audiences tends to be around the tech sector. So we can still tell that the tech organizations on the whole and employers are still hiring tech people at a good rate. But if candidates aren't moving, the chasm is growing. And that is the epitome of a candidate-driven market, because we're dependent on the movements of the candidate. So if it's a candidate-driven market, therefore we need to understand candidate drivers. And this is where the Universum data starts to give us a little bit more kind of insights as to what is really, really important. And so, what are the 10 most important things to tech talent right now? You can see them there on the left-hand side on our 40 drivers of employer attractiveness scale that Universum delivers all around the world. The top 10 for tech talent there on the left-hand side. You can see the ones with the arrows are the ones that have moved up the most this year in that top 10. They are around work-life balance, flexible working, no surprises there. Fourth place is professional training development has gone up. Also not surprising, given what we just learned on the last slide. And that fourth chart, which is around the fact that actually there was a 14% drop of people believing they are being provided with and are given the skills to do the job successfully in tech. So for tech talent to say, I want more training development marries up, makes complete sense. We also see future earnings, security up there, etc., and innovation back on the rise again. It actually had a bit of a couple of years where it drifted, but we're now seeing elements where innovation is popular again as a path. But I think as a theme on the left and then on the right, we see things that are around. Salary is always important. Never, ever underestimate. In employer branding, we talk a lot about the lovely things and the beautiful environments and all those kinds of things. Still, people are going to say yes or no to your company quite often because of salary. So salary is still a factor. We need to work out how we position salary, and particularly right now, we're in a financial crisis really at the moment in so many ways. But also things around making positive impact. We'll see a little bit of that in a second. Future focus, people are looking for security in future. What are you going to give me? Where am I going? What am I doing? And of course, flexibility. We've just been talking about flexibility, but I believe flexibility covers all manner of things, really. There are lots of layers to flexible working conditions and work-life balance just doesn't mean remote or not remote. It also means respect for the individual and my life and the things that I do outside of work. Do you encourage the things that I do? Do you believe in me as a person and my family and all those kind of things? So flexibility and work-life balance are much, much more than the simplicity of remote, not remote. It's much more about how you make people feel in those kind of areas. And the demand for those things is going upwards, as you see, as really important factors. But if we break this down by male and female, I'll try and draw your attention to these things just bit by bit here without the animations. But on the left, we see what the top 10 things that female tech talent wants. And on the right, we see the top 10 things that men want. To use a little bit of Morecambe and Wise terminology, largely they're the same notes, but just in a slightly different order. You see what I did there. So you can see that the women at the top, their flexible working is more important than it is for men. But there are certain differences. Great. I put two arrows towards things like future earnings, male tech talent still having a bit of a hang up about the money, making sure that the future earnings are really strong, whereas it's still important for women, but not as important as other features, such as security, which is not as high for men. But female tech talent need to feel that security, that safety inside their organization, and the feeling of fairness and opportunity, and the same applies the same as men. But what you see in the two looped examples on each side, the two looped ones are the differences in the top 10 between men and women. So on the right-hand side there, we see men index quite highly for innovation, whereas women not so much. And for men, equally the clear path for advancement, so more about that future focus, future growth kind of piece. Whereas ladies are more driven by inspiring purpose, i.e. why do I want? I'm less fussed about the innovation. I want to know, why am I innovating? What am I doing as a developer? What's the purpose behind what I'm doing? But the big one there as well is respect for people, right high up at number 7 for ladies. And we saw it on the last page, but I knew it would be a focus here. So because this is something that very, very understandably, women ask for slightly more from men, because institutionally men have always received slightly more respect than female, and probably particularly in the tech sector. And respect covers a lot of those other things at the top as well. When we say respect for people, we include things like work-life balance and those flexible working, friendly work environment, great support, etc. So the respect piece is super, super important. Does that make sense, guys?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Always interesting to see these differences. Are we saying then that employers should be marketing their jobs differently to men and women?
Yes. If I was painting the perfect recruitment marketing scenario, and this is typically what we'll try and do with our customers on this, is work out where is your emphasis of where you are trying to attract talent from. We're trying to drill into target audiences, and sometimes those target audiences are just broad. They're just take talent, please. It's tough enough as it is, let alone trying to, to narrow. So it is perfectly fine to go with a overarching tech narrative based on what was on the previous slide around these are the core things. But if you're an organization that has a bit of an imbalance, a gender imbalance in terms of your tech employees, then this is when it starts to make some pertinent sense. Because actually, if the leadership in your organization is saying, come on, like we're really, really male heavy here, we need to resolve it, then if I were you, I would focus on understanding the drivers of women and focusing on campaigns that are deliberately designed to attract women, not solely. No banner over the top saying we need women, please come and apply. We've got nice things, etc. But it's more about how do you angle your approach based on the variety of these factors. Because yes, of course, respect for people and inspiring purpose is right there. They're unique to men. But as I've just alluded to as well, 8 to the 10 are the same. So we can still talk about career, solidity, security, and all those kind of things. But you need a blend. You need a little twist that demonstrates, that captures the hook, that allows female tech talent to go, they've got the things I need. That's the kind of employer I'm looking for, rather than the predetermined assumption that it's just going to be another tech employer or tech team with all blokes and beards and football tape.
So 2 points, I think. Obviously, it's well documented the deficit of women within the tech space. Tech Talent Charter, very good organisation.
Yes.
Do a yearly report on it. I think it's up to 21%. That has increased. Members of Tech Talent Charter would say 26%.
Yeah.
So they're either doing something right or are naturally switched on. So they're ahead of that game. But certainly plenty to do. So the second point is, this is the messaging, but there's also the language aspect as well. And just really a plug for a completely free thing, which is the gender bias decoder, which is really, really useful online. And actually, you can do it to see if it's too skewed towards women. Maybe if you're recruiting in marketing or HR, which is almost the opposite of the tech community. So that's really, really useful to message, to use the language to get this message across, I think. But fair enough. So definitely a plus, and almost certainly the case in most organizations.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because when I led the enterprise team, we changed the language of one of the roles, which was an AD role, and we made sure that it had a right balance. And we got amazing talent that came in because it didn't have the male-oriented hunter type role. So it's really important to get that language right. But Steve, going back to your point, it's around how can we, what examples have you seen in the market where this has been done well? Because I think that's the informative part.
Yeah, I think there are companies who are trying this. The goal is not to overtly do it, and I'll give some examples as such of some ideas in a little bit as to what are the best ways to present. But to jump ahead a little bit, because it's worthwhile as we're talking about, we don't see enough examples of great female leadership in our employer brand recruitment marketing activity. We don't index highly on the balance in our communications, etc. So I think because I think what in all the journey we're thinking about and attracting some of the right words will get people in the right place, some of the right stories will get people in the right. But if people don't see authenticity and don't see real examples of female leadership, female career growth equal to male career growth, then it will turn female talent off. We don't need our stats to be able to demonstrate, but they do actually show the stat inside the data. Women, as we all know, will look for a lot more points of certainty that they can apply for a role. Us men, we just dive in with our 2 big feet and tend to be a little bit less structured in our thinking around why we would apply for a job. We'll chance it, we'll go for it because the nature is definitely there. Whereas with female respondents, they need more indicators of these factors we're seeing on the screen here around the fact that actually, is it going to be a safe place for them to work? Are they only going to be the only female and there's going to be 50 other men in the room? Are they going to be supported in the way? Are they going to be respected for the things that are important to them and their lives, etc.? etc., etc. And what therefore I would argue, if we were to say, going back to your original question, Dom, around should we market completely differently to male and female? We should understand the differences, but if we have to choose one for the purposes of cost and simplicity, if we had to choose one, go towards the women, because we're three guys on this call. If we look at those 10 things on the left hand side and we got those from our employer, we're going to be pretty happy, right? Regardless of whether a male or female. And those differentiators around respect for people, inspiring purpose, we're also going to look at and go, yes, please. If we focus too much on the stuff on the right, we may miss the female message. We might miss the mark and be tone deaf.
But I think it goes back to your point as well, though, Steve, about not being so totally overt about it.
Yes, precisely. Yeah.
It's got to be, and that's where I think the subtlety of language can come in and play a really, really useful part. Yeah. And there's probably some put upon recruitment people out there thinking, blimey, this is a lot to take in. But remember what it does. It helps that DE&I balance score, etc. And it's so much more than just throwing money at a problem. Because you've got to have that culture, etc., embedded and that authenticity you were talking about.
Absolutely.
Just
good
a
for
point
brand reputation.
Absolutely. And that word gets round because it is a community. So, question from the audience. Nicola has asked actually about this slide, Steve.
Yeah.
What's the difference between flexible working conditions and encouraging work-life balance?
Well, we don't describe them when we present it. We allow whoever responds it to take it as they see it and then vote for it in, if you like, as an important thing. How would I describe it? When we use this data and then sit with a customer and go, what do these things mean? I look at these two things differently in one way. Work-life balance is not about where you work, what time you finish, what time you start. Partly, there's a slither of that. But I think work-life balance is the knowledge that I've got kids. And if I go to Tony, who's my boss, and say, I've got a bit of my kids have got a big football match this afternoon. I really need to be there as the dad. Tony's going to go, absolutely, right? Absolutely. So though it's the respect for people's lives in tandem with their work. If I feel like I've got a good work-life balance, I feel like that I'm not over-indexing on my work, and my work doesn't define me. Equally, my work and my life are of equal definition. The first question we ask in our team meetings, as Tony would always say, is kind of like, how are you? How are you as a person? Before we start getting into work stuff, how are you? And things like that. So it's the respect between the two. Whereas I would say flexible working conditions are obviously much more around hours, location, environment, freedom to move, etc., etc. And I think there's a lot of factors in that. I think it's more situational, whereas I would say work-life balance is more around the feeling of the blend of work and life. I hope that answers the question, Nicola, in how I see it anyway. But we allow the people respond to just choose it the way they feel. But naturally, as you can probably tell, they tend to follow each other around in our research.
Amy's asked, should we not be using gender neutral language? And I think this is a really important clarification on what we are saying. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on. It should be gender neutral language. I think what naturally will fall into the path of a bit, as we sort of alluded earlier, is that we tend to over-index one way or another, that we'll say, right, we need female talents, let's talk all about female. It's less about talking to women or talking to men. It's understanding the needs of talent and addressing, and what we're talking about here is what do they need from an employer, and therefore being able to tell stories about those things as an employer you offer. And what you're therefore playing the odds on is that if you're telling the right stories about the experiences of life inside an organization in the right kind of way, or focuses about the job in a right kind of way, it will have the best magnetic effect to women, but hopefully equally to men as well. I think that's what I was trying to get to with that point a short while ago, to say men are less choosy in the sense that we tend to be a little bit more of more kind of simple about our choices.
Yeah, but I also think to overlay on that, it's not what we are not saying is using he or she in the languages in the language,
No,
but the gender bias decoder would look at more stereotypically male terms like
absolutely.
smashing target or
Yeah, yeah,
Exactly.
the
great
highly
example.
competitive
Yeah,
environment or something like that. We're
yeah,
not saying only use he or she in a
yeah,
in in a
absolutely not. Yes,
in
exactly.
a job advert at all. So it's a slight twist on that. But
And that should
I,
apply to employee brand content as well, is that
yeah,
it doesn't have to overemphasize on male, female, black, white, etc. I think what we have to do is tell great stories that are attractive to correct
Yeah.
audiences, to appropriate audiences. But all of those stories need to be inclusive, fair, correct, etc., etc. They need to be appropriate
Authentic.
for the audience rather than
yeah,
yeah, and hugely authentic, but neither divisive. Not designed to be for you or for you or for you, but designed to be for the right people. But organizations still need to address this female male balance in tech. We know this because of the numbers you mentioned. In our research, it's 28, 72% are male and 28% are female. So again, we're all in similar sort of territory in terms of what the split is. There's still a bit of work that needs to be done. We're going to look at this in a second, that still need to be addressed. And therefore, we need to show attention to female tech needs, is what I'm alluding to a little bit,
yeah,
in order to try and make sure that we are addressing those needs and making that door wider. Whereas it's kind of easy for a guy to walk into a tech room by comparison. So, in fact, to that point, using the respect piece that we mentioned there, the next slide focuses specifically on one area where respect is not demonstrated. And this is the reason why we're saying about this focus is the gender pay gap. In response to the question, what is your current salary in your role, is 16%. Now, it looked like it was going a little bit better. It looked like we were going in the right direction last year after a pretty ropey looking 2020, but it's not improving. In fact, compared to last year, the average salary from the female respondents in our research, and this is just short of 1,600 tech professionals that took this research this year. The average female salary is actually 2,000 less than it was last year, and whereas men is almost 2,000 more, 1,500 more. That's not a pay gap; that's a pay chasm. It's really, really wide, and all this kind of stuff, and it's no wonder really the female talent is looking for the security, the respect, etc., because this demonstrates a bit of a lack of respect and a lack of fairness. And look, there are two reasons why this gap can be. When we look at analysis and we look at data, it could be as simple as two people earning pretty much the same role are getting different salaries. That's not great. Equally, people might argue, well, look, probably the male one is higher because there are probably more men in senior positions in tech. Well, that's a problem too. That's equally a challenge. So either way, the average woman, the average man across the industry of the people who identified as male and female in our research are unfortunately quite far apart in salary, and I think that's something we still need to address. And this is and as the little blob in the bottom right hand corner demonstrates, if people are wondering about the whole market, tech is the worst in the market for this. It's really something that needs to be looked at. The best one, by the way, I think is engineering. Engineering, of all the sectors that we separate in engineering, which is a very typically traditional industry. All those kind of areas of civil and mechanical, I've actually got the smallest pay gap difference. Would you believe? Law is quite close to tech, but tech is definitely the worst of this, which for a very future-facing part of the business is quite surprising.
yeah.
So the summary is what we've learned so far. How does tech talent feel? The landscape is tough. Less talent is looking to move, something we're all familiar with. Trust is not the driver of retention. We saw that trust is definitely a problem. More it's around stability, care, financial crisis, etc. Look, I think people, it's logical as to why people are sticking where they are at the minute. And as we've just been talking about, I won't need to cover it again. Female tech, what they demand: greater respect, better salary, better career choices. However, unfortunately, the pay gap is going in the wrong direction. So what does this mean for tech employer branding? Let's start to think about what are the solutions and opportunities around this. Well, the first point there is about tech talent is moving, and the intent of tech talent is moving at pace. Year on year, when we present our Universum data to customers and the market, etc., the most volatile audience is always the tech audience. The tech talent tends to be much closer to the pulse of society and culture, and therefore will move much more in tune, with it, and therefore that means we really need to listen to tech talent really sharply, and obviously therefore a little plug for our Universum data as one of the benchmarks of trying to help us understand tech talent. Consider what engenders trust. I think, so we've talked a lot about trust, and therefore if we're to bridge that gap, we need to think about what the stories inside the organization are. What are the promises of the organization that do bridge that gap around trust? So what are they? Positive female images, I mentioned this earlier, of strength and success still few and far between, and that falls in line with the point beyond that, which is tech brand narrative is still really undeveloped based on norms from 5+ years ago. I mean, I read a dreadful thing a couple of years ago in Forbes, which actually the guy who wrote it, I know very well. He's a brilliant guy. He was actually writing a really great story about how tech companies are trying to address the gender balance. But Forbes decided to illustrate it with an image of 4 guys with beards playing football, to my point earlier. And it was just how to kill the tone of a great article with some like stereotypical junk of an imagery. It was just, and actually there's still a lot of this around. I think we're still acting like the tech audience is a bunch of kids, whereas actually the average, as Dom and you and I discussed last year when we looked at the trends last year, the tech audience is now a maturing audience. We're now family people. Tech developers are now family people, etc., because the average age of a developer has grown and grown and grown, of course, as the industry becomes maturer. And then stories need to find the right time, right people at the right time in the right place. And this is really important in this environment around employer branding right now, if that makes sense. That this is something that's really super important, that we are almost personalizing our message, or making messages feel personal to us when we read them. Does that make sense what I'm saying there, guys, about right time, right time?
Yeah.
And any comments on that?
Steve, but I think that's actually a really fascinating point, because if you look at, we're from Stepster, and it's right job for everyone is our mission statement, but it's actually quite challenging. How can you actually make sure that what you're doing is actually on point all the time, or as much of the time?
Yeah, and I guess some of the clues that we've given to this already, and it's a passionate area of our world in Universum and employer branding. Look, really great employer branding and really great recruitment marketing hits the mark more, misses the mark less. Simple as that, right? We all shudder when we get something, an advert on our phone that is utterly a mismatch to who we are, and even worse if it's a job. If somebody's trying to promote themselves as an employer in our feed, and you're looking at it going, well, I'm a 50-year-old guy. A great example is a customer last year. We were helping them understand the better ways of targeting, and I said to them, I saw your company did a post in my Instagram feed yesterday, and he said, there you go, Steve, we're doing it right. I said, well, arguably not. I'm a 50-year-old bloke in employer branding. You're targeting 22 people in data analysis. Therefore, straight away, just because I've looked at your website, that doesn't mean that I'm interested in working for you. The two things don't necessarily correlate. So right time is person, and this comes back to data. And in fact, actually, if I jump to the next slide, I'll walk through a little bit of how this works in the best possible way. And this starts with, because one of the things there is right place, right? So the right place. So it starts with making sure that your message goes where people actually are learning about careers, learning about you as an employer. And the top 3 things for tech talent, there are 75% social media, 51% job boards, 42% their career sites. So straight away, which is good for us guys, because I work in social media marketing and you guys are in job boards. So I think across the whole, we're in the right we're in the right zone, which is a great start. But also then understanding what is the point of those platforms. What are we trying to achieve in each of those platforms? And almost like there's almost a funnel just being created just by me putting those 3 lines on the slide there that we're starting to, because what we've learned in the session today is that because there are less people looking to move right now, we know this was what that means is the active audience is smaller, the passive audience is larger. So therefore we need to do more work in the passive area. And that means more work in the what I call the inspire and nurture stage. Impact, of course, our content still has to hit people in the right place at the right time when they're saying, right, I need a job. I'm going to go to CW Jobs right now and have a look. What are the opportunities for me right here, right now? And then they can learn about employers, but then apply at the same time. But if the passive audience is getting wider, then we need to do more work in the influencing area. When people are saying, I don't want to move, I don't want to move, then what we need to do is use that social media bit better by telling stories around what it's like. That's one of the things we've been talking about. But to do it correctly, social media is a beast of a place. And it's a beast of a place because it seems like they make it harder and harder and harder to allow us to target for lots of very good social reasons. But actually, it operates by algorithms. And with really good data, if you put really great data in the front of an algorithm, the algorithm performs better. If anybody knows that the most, it's tech people. So the more great data you put in the front, and that again is a bit of a plug for Universum talent data, because I think if you put in the right talent data, research data into say, I know what the kind of people I want. Show us Universum, who are the kind of people who are like the people I want, the kind of characteristics, job aspirations, etc., etc. Plug those human examples in the front as a source audience, plug it around there. Then you get a higher level of content to the right people in the right place with the right behaviors and in the channels they want to learn about it. So impact, inspire, and nurture, lots of different ways. It's a blended approach to the way in which we connect rather than a one-dimensional. So that's why I would encourage thinking about the different routes. And I know Tony will mention some of these a little bit later on as well.
You describe it as a beast, Steve. You describe it as a beast, but I think it's a jungle. So I thoroughly advise external assistance with social media if you're not necessarily it's your key focus. And I think as an example of this, I would point to IBM and their day in the life of their tech community, and I think it's been done really well. And actually, I need to be forgiven because I can't remember the agency they used, but that's a great example of ongoing requirements, but an ongoing message as to what they are doing, both as a company and the actual employees on a daily basis, very much in that nurture. So you might not be intending to move for the next 6 months, but IBM starts to move up the scale of your desires.
Absolutely.
Just a very quick point. Kate has mentioned in our country we need to show salary range in the job ad. It helps reduce salary gaps between male and female. I don't know what country she is talking from. She doesn't mention that, but I think that it goes just reiterating this point again and covering this point off. That not having a salary is a massive turnoff to female applicants, more so than males. I think males have that stereotypical thing of I'll go in there and I'll tell them because I'm so good. Whereas for females, there's that feeling of, well, I'm going to be taken advantage of because they're going to not put something on and then offer me the lowest that they possibly can. So good point, Kate. Nicola, how do content choices differ by generation? Now, this is a whole presentation in itself, isn't it, Stephen? We've spoken about the Gen Z, millennial, and our generation as well.
And it's a great question, and it definitely is one that does need a little bit more time. But think of the same approach I just mentioned a minute ago. If you start with understanding the right audience and choosing the right group of people because you're trying to address different needs in the organization, then from there you build what the right message, right content is, and then where the right platforms are, where they will spend the time to go. So the formula, the universal formula, is the same each time. It's just the starting point is what are you trying to target, who are you trying to achieve. So yeah, really great observation that I could spend another half an hour chatting about. But
I mean, and I'm sure we'll do something. Or if not us, then Universum will be doing something.
You know where we are. Yeah, exactly.
And Helen makes also the point, currently in Brazil and Latin America, we see a huge problem with the lack of soft skills, especially in millennials and he says Gen Y, but millennials are Gen Y, aren't they? So I'm imagining Gen Z. And these generations that work with Generation X and baby boomer leadership. What does your research say about it widely? I think that the demand for soft skills is certainly increasing as companies become larger and more global. Tech has to interact with so many different departments now, and it's becoming much more of a human department, isn't it? Whereas it used to be the place at the end of the
Back
corridor
office.
kind of thing.
That's right. I agree.
So are you seeing that as a specific issue?
I think we see it. I think we need to have the faith in the next generation. I think it's interesting what they're saying about soft skills and the sort of the next generation coming in. The irony is the next generation, our Gen Z research, which was earlier in the year, absolutely demands that the employers have soft skills. so I think what they're asking for is the soft skills because they believe they have them themselves. And I think so. It may be just a scenario where Gen Z and employers of Gen Z, people coming into the workplace, either from university or from apprenticeships or whatever, start to need to learn to understand each other, understand how to dance with each other effectively, and start listening to each other. And that's, I think, where we start to learn where the magic can happen in the middle. Because I think even the mention of millennials, if you look at millennial research, you're already not going to get Gen Z research. Millennial is somebody that's almost 38 years old now at the top end.
Yeah.
So I think we need to consider, if we're looking at the next generation, it's Gen Z that you want to look for. So look at students and apprenticeship research as your guidance as to what are the things that are actually driving the most, because it's quite different to millennials. I'll say that for now.
So both think they've got soft skills, but they're not reaching out and kind of, as you say, dancing with each other necessarily.
All right, so look, that's my stuff. Back over to you, Dom.
Thank you very much. So I hope you'll agree. Some really fascinating research from Universum, always ongoing in very many different areas. So reach out to them if you'd like to hear more. Just going back really to some research we did earlier this year in the CW Jobs Confidence Index. It's the fourth year we've run it. Been some pretty tempestuous years that we've run it, and so the data is always interesting. So year one was going into Brexit. Year two was dreaded COVID. Year three was coming out of COVID. How do we change that? And obviously this year with the events over in Ukraine, cost of living crisis, etc., etc. So on the cost of living crisis, it will come as no surprise, and given the kind of confidence that tech workers generally have, 57% expect their salary to increase over the next 12 months, and that might fly in the face of what you're expecting from this, because surely they should temper that in terms of companies being under stress, but certainly not the case. 57% of tech workers, I think that their salary is going up in the next 12 months. 1 in 4, I think they deserve a promotion too. And actually, there's some understanding of this when you look at 23% of senior leaders are planning to increase the number of pay rises in the next 12 months. So there is an understanding of that. It's just not to the level that tech workers are potentially going to expect. And this is a really interesting point as well. Helping with the cost of living crisis. So whether that's heating payment, something to help on that side. I think this is a great thing to make clear to potential employees. It goes back to that hypercare of 2 years ago. Not necessarily hypercare, but it is saying we do care, and hopefully imbuing some kind of trust. So it'd be interesting to see how that plays out over the next 2, 3, 4 months, and then hopefully into a very warm spring and summer, that we don't need to have the heating on so much. But so interesting that is being taken very, very seriously. And I wonder if it would have been taken so seriously if we hadn't had COVID, and that period of hypercare that you mentioned, Steve. If it had, or it would have just been, well, there you go, get on with it. So if we go to the next slide, if there are no questions on that, outside of the money side, what does tech talent want? So reiterating some of Steve's stuff as well, 1 in 2 want flexible working options. It's almost becoming a standard. And if you are asking people to be 100% in the office as a tech employer, you need to have a really, really strong employer value proposition in other areas. Steve and I have spoken at length about how that can potentially be done, but that's going to be your trickiest angle. So you need either have a massive brand or some excellent benefits to offset that. 30% desire clear progression, particularly relevant when we go back to the Universum stuff in women. And I think this goes back to that trust and suspicion that they're going to be not treated as effectively. But if there's a clear career progression, that they can trust that company a little bit further. Mental health benefits, very, very important as well. Very difficult to kind of say what mental health benefits are, but I think it's probably that work-life balance, a respect for the individual, benefits of, I don't know, chair massage or something like that, bit of me time when you are in the office, and actually feel as though you're being looked out for by your employer. And 26% aspire to work with leading technology. I'm sure that's been higher previously, but I think people are tempering their aspirations on that, particularly in the next year. And again, there was a slide that talked about that 1 to 4 years. Yes, I'm looking to move. Next year, batten down the hatches. Let's see what happens. But innovation still important, and the leading technology still important. So if you've got that, make something of it in your job ads. So if we go to the next slide, hiring more efficiently. So what can you do to attract? Well, IT decision makers put a stronger focus, 39%, a stronger focus on tech hiring to remain as competitive as possible. I think we've seen a different shape in recessions. If we are going into a recession that's short or long, companies are a little bit more long term about it. They know if they shrink their footprint in the tech market, they're going to find it very difficult to come out and ramp up again. So it's about supporting what they have, and even to an extent to throw even more focus behind it. Companies talking about making better use of recruitment technology. Tony will speak about that in a moment. I think also it's worth making sure you're getting the most out of what you currently have as well, not just the newer stuff as well. Making sure that the pathway to an application is as quick and clean as possible.
Yeah.
And why have we been banging on about the DE&I side so much? Because it's not a fashion statement. This is really, really important and ongoing. And it's great that 4 in 10 IT decision makers actually back that. So that is why it's so important that we discuss that, I think. Cybersecurity and artificial intelligence ranked very, very highly on industry-specific specialisms. So, yeah, AI definitely going to move the whole tech world forward as that grows and becomes more entrenched in pretty much everything we do. And of course, with the threats that we see in the world at the moment, understandable that cybersecurity is very high on the scale as well. So that would point to efficiencies. If we go to the next slide, I'll pass you over to the very capable hands of Tony, who's talking about the different solutions to attracting tech talent. Tony.
Yeah, thanks, Dom, and thanks, Steve. I think what's really fascinating here is that over the next 12 months, right, we know that there's going to be challenges in the market for tech employers, tech recruiters, how they're going to find the right skills that they need to navigate the challenges ahead. One of the ways is just adopting a what I will call a blended, and I think we've been talking about a blended way of attracting different talent using various solutions. And at Total Job Stepstone, we have a plethora of it. And I'm just going to really just quickly touch through a few of them. Let's start with video recruiting, right? Now, I don't know about you, but I've got a 19-year-old and a 16-year-old, right? And they fall smack bang into this Gen Z route here. And they spend so much time on consuming video, whether it's Instagram Reels, Snap, TikTok. This is their visual language, and I think it's really important that when we're looking at trying to attract and retain great talent, we use the language and we communicate the language that people are more used to. For us, it may become like a little bit more second nature, but for them, it's their first nature. So video recruiting is really important in that. And what we've seen is because there's different parts. You can attract and engage on one side, and then you can assess and select on the other. Assess and select, we're used to that, and that's around sort of like the normal video interviewing piece. But on the attract and engage piece, I find this really interesting, right? Because we use clips in our company just to send out just video messages, because the open rate is 3 times more effective than if you use a staid long text email. So that's one way. But the second bit is, and this is part of the technology that we use, is the stories. I love this feature. And what it is that, I think, Dom, you talked about IBM and a day in the life. When I first saw this on our technology, I call it the honest burger moment, because that was what it was. And Honest Burger had a lovely advert when you click on it, and then it goes to the job. But what it did was really demonstrate how engaging, how interesting, how people could be themselves in serving their customers. And I was really, really excited about that. And I'm not even in the industry, but yet they told an authentic story using the video medium. And this is, when we can do social messaging right, this is when it comes to the fore. Then I'll quickly touch on early careers. Right, there's a big trend in, do you buy in talent or do you nurture the talent? Nurturing is definitely coming to the fore, and one of the ways around that is the apprenticeship schemes, right? Especially if you can offer a degree apprenticeships levels 5 to level 7. I mentioned my son earlier on; he went off to university, but his friend Louis went off to IBM to do a degree apprenticeship. He didn't want to have debt at the end of it, right? So these are the choices that young talent are making. And one of the best ways to secure young talent is actually going out and doing offering a summer internship or a 1-year internship. Get them before they graduate. Jump that stage, and that's one of the tactics that I've seen a lot of companies using. And don't forget, we've got a website called Milkround, and that's over a 20-year pedigree of doing this. So just contact us, and we can talk you through more on that. Then we talk about equality boost. Now, some may not be aware of this, but we have a programmatic retargeting offer, which uses data-led job adverts served to a job-seeking audience on key websites at the right time in the right place. When we do this the way we do it, the results are really, really compelling. Or one of our key clients that uses this is AstraZeneca, and honestly, the results are amazing. But it's really the ability to reach sometimes the unreachable, and we have the ability to target based on location, based on sector, based on gender, based on ethnic background, and also based on age. So our programmatic retargeting offering is there as well. Employee branding, Steve, you're the grandmaster of that one, but obviously it's available from what we do. But Steve, one of the things that I'll quickly just touch on here is that when I first met you a few years back, when employers were saying, right, they're going to do their EVP, it was every 4 years. But now that's changed, hasn't it? It's definitely gone back to like almost every.
The world changed, and therefore everybody needed to change their promise. Everything we've learned today actually is around the fact that everything we've thought was right 3 years ago is no longer relevant, because people have moved, desires have moved, changed. So you're absolutely right. Yes, I used to always say kind of like it's EVP every 3-4 years. Somebody will do an EVP, maybe even 5 in some cases. Now it's people are evolving it much more often, and particularly right now, a lot of people are. 2022 has been a year where a lot of companies have repackaged their EVP. If you haven't done yours, you probably should do it pretty soon, because the competitors are getting in there ahead of you.
Exactly. And then also, look, there's a global shortage, right, of skill sets, right? Particularly it's hitting the tech sector. But if you have through what we offer, right, is a leading alliance of job boards across the world, 140. which can really tap into local talent, using local expertise, using the triggers to understand what can really help you to attract the best tech talent. I mean, at the moment, we know that Poland is being quite indexed, but we also know that Slovakia and Slovenia also have great talent. So it's really just coming to us and just working out how do we get the best talent for you. And then lastly, CV database. Our biggest part of our CV database is 23 million, but specifically for the tech sector, it's 1.4 million candidates that we've got. On 101 active candidates are logging on every month. So use that to attract your passive talent. And the last thing I'll say is the trend that we're seeing is a blended approach. So many of our customers are using multiple ways. Video recruiting, adverts on programmatic, plus they're doing global hiring, plus they're doing employee branding. It's that blended approach to help solve customer problems is what we're about. But more tips, I'm going to hand you back to Don.
Just to wrap up, really, hopefully if we go to the next slide, to the point of the apprenticeship schemes, focus on developing in-demand skills in-house if possible. That's not available to everybody, but if you can do it, I thoroughly advise it, particularly in cybersecurity and artificial intelligence. And I think one of the beauties of those kind of schemes is you can choose the intake. So if you want to go heavily on an ethnicity or a gender issue, you can dictate that and hopefully take them all the way through and make an active change to your potentially gender pay gap. All the way down the line. So think about that. Long term, it may even be cheaper than trying to buy in the skills. Look out for the employees, support their mental well-being, but also this cost of living crisis. Again, not an option for all employers, but if you can do it, make something of it, because you will get extra credit down the line, either in retention or attraction. Communicate company direction clearly. I think it was 90% of IT interviewers said they'd been asked by Gen Z candidates about what their corporate and social responsibility strategy was. What are they doing? So make sure your interviewers know what the vision for the company is, for their department, for their projects, because that's going to be very, very attractive. We've seen for females, but also for that Gen Z as well. What are you doing for the environment and then the wider world? Again, overlaying that again, hopefully that's come through loud and clear about developing that strong employer brand. I think we know who to go to with Universum on that score. Recruiting a diverse workforce, it's the correct thing to do, but also it's economically the right thing to do. You are going to make products that are relevant to a diverse client base, and potentially missing your tricks if you're doing the same old things with the same old slice of society doing it and making all the decisions, and make better use of recruitment technology. I mean, the video recruitment is the one I'm most keen on to see how that evolves, because I think all of us will remember, I wonder when you won't have a CV, it'll be a video thing, and that hasn't really caught fire. There's still profiles and CVs that are required, but I think the video recruitment, rather than just video interviewing, which is just a slice of it, but understanding video recruitment and how that can be best used, and that transition from a social media ad coming through to an actual job ad and then an application. I think that's going to be fascinating to see how that evolves over the next 2, 3, 4 years. And obviously, ATS systems utilizing more AI, job boards utilizing more AI. We have Maya, which interacts with candidates on text and WhatsApp, emotionally astute AI tool, kind of fine tuning the kind of roles you're looking for, because you've said, no, that's the wrong role, don't send that to me again. So it's fine tuning it. So I think that there's lots of stuff coming, but don't run before you can walk, and make sure you've got everything laced up with the current tools you have, and you're maximizing those already, rather than trying to buy in something new when you didn't even get the other stuff working. So be honest with yourself about that, and honest with the company that you're working for. So that's it. We've run through the questions as we've rolled. So a kind of sit down chat. at the end, we've hopefully satisfied that by going through the questions as we've rolled through the presentation. I hope that's been useful to everybody. Please reach out. This will be sent out. This video will be sent out if your GDPR ticks on LinkedIn allow us to after the presentation. The video will be sent out, and these are the contact details where you can get in touch with us. And we've obviously got account managers that can help you in more depth, or you can speak to us directly. So it just left to me really to say thank you ever so much for attending. Wish you a great Christmas. Keep warm, and hopefully see you next year with some more information for you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Cheers.